There's another player that has wronged Caitlin Clark, and they're out of the league.
In the hours that followed, analysts and commentators dissected the sequence from every possible angle, replaying it repeatedly while offering sharply contrasting interpretations. Some insisted the contact was simply part of the sport's physical nature, arguing that basketball at the professional level is fast, intense, and often chaotic. From that perspective, collisions can occur even when players have no intention of causing harm. Others, however, took a far more critical stance, asserting that the footage suggested premeditation. They pointed to the positioning of DeShields before the impact, claiming she appeared to set herself well in advance of Clark's movement, as though anticipating the exact moment to step into her path. The debate quickly broadened as comparisons surfaced. A number of fans referenced an earlier incident involving Kennedy Carter, recalling a hip check that had also sparked controversy earlier in the season. Some argued that Carter's play, while questionable, happened when Clark was stationary, making it easier to dismiss as misjudgment. By contrast, they claimed, the DeShields collision occurred while Clark was moving at full speed, which in their view made it look more forceful and more deliberate. Others rejected that comparison entirely, insisting that each play should be judged independently rather than linked together to create a pattern. What nearly everyone agreed on was that physicality itself is not unusual. Throughout any game, players jostle for position, set hard screens, and fight through contact in the paint. That level of toughness is part of what defines professional competition. The line separating acceptable aggression from unsportsmanlike conduct, however, can be thin and subjective. When a defender lowers a shoulder and drives through an opponent rather than attempting to play the ball, critics argue that the intent appears questionable. Supporters counter that split-second decisions in live action can look harsher than they actually are, especially when slowed down and replayed repeatedly. The league's broader approach to defending Clark had already been a topic of conversation before this moment. Opposing teams knew she was a central offensive threat and often designed strategies specifically to disrupt her rhythm. Physical defense, tight coverage, and constant pressure were all part of that effort. In that context, some viewers saw the collision as an extension of competitive tactics rather than a personal act. Others believed it crossed into frustration, suggesting that repeated attempts to contain a star player can sometimes lead defenders to push boundaries. Ultimately, the incident became more than a single play. It turned into a symbol used by different sides to support different narratives, either proof that the league allows excessive contact or evidence that fans overreact to normal basketball intensity. The truth, as often happens in sports controversies, likely sits somewhere between those extremes, shaped as much by perception as by the brief moment that started it all.
Caitlin Clark is trying to cut in this position right here, and Diamond DeShields just body checks her. Like, it's a foul. This sequence of play was wild. Absolutely, absolutely wild. Caitlin Clark gets hit from behind. How bad, egregious it was from Diamond DeShields, and Caitlin Clark jumps up and runs away from Diamond DeShields.
The tension inside the arena was already palpable as the final minutes ticked away in what had been an intense and highly competitive contest. Indiana held a commanding lead over Chicago, and the pace of play had accelerated as both teams pushed hard through the closing stretch. The crowd's energy shifted from suspense to anticipation, sensing that the outcome was nearly decided but still eager to witness one last highlight. In that charged atmosphere, Caitlin Clark cut sharply across the lane, controlling the ball with the speed and awareness that had defined her performance all night. The play looked routine at first, a fast break forming, defenders scrambling, and spectators rising slightly from their seats in expectation of another scoring attempt. Then came the collision. Diamond DeShields moved toward Clark with force, lowering her shoulder as she closed the distance. Observers who later replayed the moment frame by frame argued that her eyes appeared fixed on Clark rather than on the ball, a detail that quickly became central to the controversy. The impact was immediate and unmistakable. Bodies met with a thud loud enough to echo through the arena, and for a split second everything seemed to pause as fans tried to process what they had just seen. Some described it as a hard but legal defensive stand, others insisted it looked deliberate, more like a statement than a basketball play. The distinction between those interpretations is what has fueled so much argument. Basketball is, by nature, a physical sport. Screens, bumps, and shoulder-to-shoulder contact happen constantly, often without drawing attention. Yet critics of the hit claim this instance felt different because of the timing and angle. They argue that the motion resembled a charge directed at a player rather than an attempt to disrupt possession. Supporters of DeShields counter that split-second decisions in high-speed competition can appear harsher in slow motion than they felt in real time. Regardless of intent, the visual was striking. Clark's forward momentum halted abruptly, and the sequence instantly became the defining image of the game. Within minutes, spectators in the stands were already replaying it on their phones, showing clips to neighbors and debating whether it crossed a line. Moments like that often take on a life of their own, transforming from simple plays into symbolic flashpoints that represent broader tensions. What might otherwise have been forgotten as just another aggressive defensive stop instead became the centerpiece of discussion. The collision didn't just interrupt a fast break, it ignited a conversation that would continue long after the final buzzer, raising questions about sportsmanship, intent, and where competitive intensity ends and controversy begins.
She assaulted Caitlin Clark on the court right before Caitlin Clark came off the court with 3:52 left.
When Clark hit the floor, the sound of sneakers screeching and the crowd gasping blended into a brief wave of chaos. For an instant, all eyes shifted from the scoreboard to the spot where she had landed. Referees reacted quickly, whistles cutting through the noise to halt play. The official ruling, however, surprised many watching both in the arena and at home. It was called a common foul. There was no upgrade, no lengthy review, and no immediate indication that the officials believed anything extraordinary had occurred. To some spectators, that decision felt routine. To others, it seemed strangely understated given the force of the collision they believed they had witnessed. Clark rose almost immediately, brushing herself off with visible composure. Rather than confronting DeShields or arguing with officials, she turned and jogged away, returning to position as though determined not to let the moment disrupt her focus. That reaction quickly became part of the narrative. Admirers praised her restraint, interpreting it as evidence of professionalism and mental toughness. They argued that maintaining composure after a hard hit demonstrated confidence and discipline. Critics, meanwhile, suggested that the absence of protest might have influenced the referee's decision not to review the play more closely. DeShields, standing nearby, extended a hand in what appeared to be a gesture of sportsmanship. Yet the reception to that moment was mixed. Some observers viewed it as a genuine attempt to help an opponent up, something commonly seen after physical plays. Others believed it looked performative, as if it were meant to soften the optics of the collision rather than express concern. The interpretation largely depended on each viewer's perspective before the incident even happened. Fans who already admired her saw courtesy, those who were skeptical saw calculation. Inside the arena, reactions were just as divided. A portion of the crowd booed, while another segment remained quiet, unsure how to interpret what they had witnessed. That uncertainty is often what keeps sports debates alive. Ambiguity leaves space for opinion. If a play is clearly malicious or clearly accidental, consensus forms quickly. But when a moment sits in the gray area between those extremes, it invites endless discussion. Within minutes, social media began filling with slowed-down clips, zoomed-in angles, and frame-by-frame breakdowns. Each new version seemed to support a different argument. Some angles made the contact look unavoidable, others made it appear intentional. The official's decision not to escalate the call only intensified the scrutiny, because it meant there was no definitive ruling to settle the dispute. In the end, the whistle may have stopped the play, but it did not stop the debate. Instead, it marked the beginning of a conversation that would grow louder with every replay, every opinion, and every new viewer forming their own conclusion about what really happened in that fleeting, controversial instant.
I said that the Diamond DeShields flagrant foul on Caitlin Clark was more dangerous than the Kennedy Carter one.
Observers who had followed previous matchups between Chicago and Indiana began pointing out that the controversial collision did not exist in isolation. According to those viewers, earlier games between the teams had already shown signs of escalating physicality, particularly in the interactions between DeShields and Clark. They cited instances of off-ball contact, tight closeouts, and body positioning that seemed unusually forceful, suggesting a pattern had been developing over time. Whether those moments were intentional or simply the natural result of competitive defense became a matter of interpretation, but the perception of repetition gave the latest incident added weight. To critics, it looked like the culmination of weeks of mounting tension rather than a spontaneous occurrence. Clark's reaction after the hit became a focal point in its own right. Instead of confronting her opponent or appealing dramatically to the officials, she resumed play almost immediately. Many supporters praised that response, interpreting it as evidence of discipline and focus. They argued that choosing not to argue or retaliate demonstrated confidence and professionalism, qualities they believed define elite competitors. In post-game remarks about physical defense in general, Clark has often emphasized that contact is part of basketball and that performance is the best response. That consistent attitude has helped shape her public image as someone who prefers letting her play speak louder than her words. Meanwhile, critics of DeShields focused on her body language after the collision, particularly the extended hand she offered. To them, it looked insincere, as though it were meant to soften criticism rather than express genuine concern. Supporters disagreed, saying gestures of sportsmanship are common after hard fouls and shouldn't automatically be viewed with suspicion. This difference in interpretation once again illustrated how the same moment can generate opposite conclusions depending on the viewer's perspective. As clips of the play spread online, reactions multiplied rapidly. Social media platforms filled with comments labeling the collision everything from routine contact to a deliberate cheap shot. Hashtags trended, debate threads stretched for thousands of replies, and slow-motion edits circulated widely. The viral spread ensured that even people who hadn't watched the game live became aware of the incident, forming opinions based solely on short video segments. During those early hours, the league itself remained silent, offering no immediate statement. That silence only intensified speculation. Fans began watching closely for any sign of disciplinary action or official clarification, convinced that whatever happened next would reveal how seriously the situation was being taken. For many observers, the unfolding aftermath felt less like the end of a play and more like the beginning of a larger storyline, one that might ultimately shape perceptions of both players and influence how future matchups between their teams are viewed.
And that's what a lot of these women are doing, is they feel like what we have done for this game, this young player has come into our game, and she's getting way more respect and all that stuff than we are. As she should. The young girl is a baller. The young girl has people watching because of the way she can shoot this basketball like Steph Curry. Steph Curry can't dunk. Steph Curry don't do none of that in the game. He can probably dunk by himself, but he don't really do none of that in the game. He is a shooter, and fans tune in to see Steph Curry. When I look at Caitlin Clark, fans are tuning in to watch her. And you know who that's helping? Everybody else. It's helping the Asia Wilsons. It's helping everybody else, the Plums, all that. It's helping all of them, the Tarasis.
Because everyone who tries to guard Cece winds up.
Taken together, every angle, reaction, replay, and argument surrounding the incident has fused into a single narrative that now feels far bigger than the moment that sparked it. What began as one collision in a late-game sequence has transformed into a league-wide flashpoint, pulling in debates about officiating standards, player treatment, competitive intensity, and the power of public perception. Fans who watched the situation unfold in real time remember the shock of the impact and the confusion that followed. Those who encountered it later through viral clips experienced it differently, often seeing only a slowed-down fragment stripped of context. Yet both groups now participate in the same ongoing conversation, each convinced their interpretation reflects what truly happened. The reason this story refuses to fade is because it touches multiple fault lines at once. There is the question of intent, whether the contact was strategic defense, reckless aggression, or something in between. There is the question of consistency, whether similar plays in the past have been treated the same way or overlooked entirely. And perhaps most importantly, there is the question of narrative control. In modern sports culture, perception can spread faster than official rulings, and once a clip circulates widely, it can shape reputations long before any authority weighs in. That dynamic has turned the incident into a kind of case study in how moments become myths, and how myths can influence the way athletes are judged moving forward. Supporters on each side continue to marshal their evidence. One camp points to physical play as an inseparable part of high-level competition, arguing that isolating a single collision risks exaggerating what was essentially routine contact. The other camp insists that patterns matter more than isolated clips, claiming that repeated examples of similar plays suggest something intentional rather than accidental. Both positions sound convincing to those who already lean toward them, which is precisely why consensus remains so elusive. What is undeniable is the ripple effect. Teammates, commentators, and fans have all been drawn into the discussion, each adding another layer of interpretation. The longer the debate continues, the more the original moment takes on symbolic meaning. Instead of just representing one defensive play, it now represents larger themes: fairness, rivalry, toughness, and respect. Incidents like this often become reference points that people return to whenever future controversies arise, cited as precedent or proof depending on the argument being made. In that sense, the collision's true impact may not be measured by what happened on the court, but by what it sparked afterward. The discourse has already outlasted the game itself, embedding the moment into ongoing sports conversation. Whether opinions eventually soften or harden, the play has secured a place in the season's narrative, illustrating how quickly a few seconds of action can evolve into a lasting storyline. And as long as fans keep replaying it, debating it, and reinterpreting it, the moment will remain alive, no longer just a highlight or a foul, but a defining chapter in an unfolding drama that shows how powerful a single instant can become once the world starts watching.